Hello, everyone, and welcome to Accelerate Your Development with DevSpaces. We're really happy to be here today. My name is Stephen Barr. I'm evangelist for the DevGraph portfolio, and I'd like to first just get started with our agenda for today. We're going to talk about what is DevSpaces, because that's why we're all here. We talk about how to use DevSpaces, go through. We want this to be really interactive. We're going to spend most of our time just showing you how to use DevSpaces, what it is, the advantages that it can bring to you and your team. And please, at any time, put questions in the comments, and we can address them right away. This is live, interactive, and most importantly, we want to address your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about development on ARM with the Graviton, and EY and EYC integration. And at the end, we'll set aside extra time for more questions and possibly do some breakout sessions. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to and hand this over to Raul Subramaniam, and he's going to tell us about DevSpaces, what it is. He's the CTO of DevGraph, DevSpaces, and ESW Capital, and we're really excited to have him. So, Raul.
Thanks, Stephen. Really excited to be here and share with all of you our vision and the product for DevSpaces. So, Stephen, if you can just continue sharing the deck. What we want to do today is not go through a whole lot of slides or decks, but instead, show you more of what DevSpaces is and what it can do. So, like Stephen said earlier, please make this a lively session. Ask questions. Use the comment section to post whatever comments or questions you have, and we're all here to answer those for you. I'm joined today by Pavan, who is our SVP of engineering, who's done a lot of the hard work behind making DevSpaces work, and Daniel, who you probably have already met if you're an engineered customer, who leads a lot of our product around the engineered space. So let's dive right in. What is DevSpaces? So let me describe to you, what DevSpaces is. The fundamental problem that if you're a developer that you experience day in and day out, Stephen, if you can go on to the next slide, is that we as developers spend an inordinate amount of time around activities that are really not development work. There was a recent InfoWorld article that showed how much time we spend on tests, builds, setting up the development environment. And by the way, this is a very conservative estimate. I think the Dilbert articles very subtly capture the nuances of the daily life of an IT worker. And I don't think I could have found a better strip to kind of show you, one of those scenes. So we do spend an insane amount of time working on our development environments, making sure that they are working for all the dependencies that we have in our products. And as we move on to newer languages, add new dependencies, new API, new environments, whether it be cloud or on-premise or wherever else, it just gets more and more complex. And making sure that every development environment is clean, every development environment just works, can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So let's just deep dive into understanding what the problem really is. So Stephen, if you can go on to the next slide, please. The real problem is that your development environment is not the same as production. And likewise, all of us have our laptops or iPads or whatever we use to develop, and they vary from Windows boxes or to Macs to Linux boxes to different flavors of the OS, different flavors of other environment variables, different builds of dependencies, whether that be your libraries for your core product to other compilers to whatever other dependencies you might have for your product. They're just different, and every developer has a unique setup, and you just have to hope and pray that what you build on your local machine, as and when you deploy it into production, just continues to work. Now, there are a whole lot of people out there who are doing a ton of work to make sure that everything continues to be beautifully compatible, everything works really well. But it's fundamentally different. And I don't know how many edge cases you can keep chasing, trying to make sure that everything works. The "it works on my machine" syndrome is very, very real. And I don't know of a single developer who's been around for even a reasonable amount of time who hasn't either made that excuse or heard that excuse. I have certainly heard this at least 1,000 times in the few decades that I've been around. Also, we spend a lot of time manually building up all of these dev environments. It's just, insanely hard. And I'm shocked to think that it's 2022 and we still do this all manually. Given all the advancements in AI and machine learning and the cloud and all of that stuff, to think that we just still manually build all these dev environments, and there's so much um, tribal knowledge around how your product works and how to set up your dev machine. It's just shocking that we continue to do this. And of course, before you start coding, there's this entire dance that you have to do, which is configure your machine, run the build, test it before you even start coding, then hope that once the command which you have to run to get everything started with the backend server, the front end application, browser, make sure the ports are open. After you've done all that dance, that's when you can literally start coding. So it is a cumbersome task. And for 2022, for this day and age, we really need to rethink this particular problem. If you can go to the next slide, Stephen. I promise I'm not going to be talking very much through slides. So just a few more to highlight what we're getting to, and we'll spend most of our time doing live demos. So the solution really is DevSpaces that we built for ourselves. For some context, we have over 200 different enterprise-grade products that we own and run, and we have thousands of developers across 130 plus countries that work on our code bases. And the real problem that we had was that we could never get someone started fast enough on any of our products. So we really wanted a development environment that we could define as code in a simple manner. We wanted automated provisioning of these dev environments where you didn't have to worry about what infrastructure people were running. In a lot of places where our developers are working, internet connectivity is a limitation. There are a lot of other constraints which prevent these enterprise environments to be downloaded. I mean, some of our enterprise environments span hundreds of repositories where you would literally need to download something to the tune of 150 to 300 gigs, somewhere in that range, before you can even stand up something. And for that, you need insanely powerful beastie machines, which you have to keep upgrading. Ephemeral dev environments, because I don't know of a single developer who can claim that their dev environment is absolutely pristine. Mine gets messed up in no time at all. I cringe every time I have to install something locally, whether it's a dependency on my Mac, which does not work with Python or Ruby, and I have to locally compile it before it works. All of those we wanted to solve. And of course, just get developers started in a matter of a few minutes. Like, why should it take someone a month before they can start working on a bug fix or a feature that needs to be added to the code base? If you can just quickly move on to the next slide, Stephen. This again goes back to our overall theme that we have in DevGraph, which is we are trying to make AWS easy for everyone. And with DevSpaces, we are coming with the idea of making development on AWS really easy. We started off, of course, with our own use case, but we are really excited to bring this to our customers because I think everyone could benefit from having simpler, clean dev environments to get started with. So with that, I would love to move on to the next slide, which is the reality is that most organizations are now starting to see the move away from their local machine. And to be honest, the pandemic was a big contributor to that. As people started going remote, as infrastructure, making sure that remote infrastructure was available just the same way as it was in your office, where you probably had your data center or you probably had your servers running right in the room next to you where you sat. Remote really pushed everyone to rethink what it means to do development and to do development more productively, more efficiently. And there was a recent post on DX Tips, which is actually really, really interesting. And this is a really, really long thread. You guys should take some time to go through it. But it really gives you a sense for how many organizations are completely rethinking doing local development and instead looking at development being done in the cloud. If you can go on to the next slide, here are just some examples that we pulled up from the same article as well as the Twitter feed. GitHub, Google, Shopify, Tesla, Palantir, Facebook, they've all completely moved to remote development, and they've built their own systems. They've built, um, a whole lot of infrastructure to enable this for their entire workforce, because they truly see the benefits of doing this. When your employees want to be remote, when you want to access infrastructure without being felt without being held hostage by your own local machine, your remoteness to wherever all your resources are sitting. And we see the world the same way. We see the world moving to this setup where everything is moving to remote, and so should your development environment. And DevSpaces, you might ask the question, those are all really big names. And while these big names really push the boundaries or the edge of where computing or regular software development moves, the reality is that today we are in a world where something like DevSpaces, which is a remote development environment, is also absolutely perfect for small teams. We have teams that are single person or single IC kind of teams, where I myself code almost every other day. I use DevSpaces to write up code for a bunch of automation, to 2-member teams, to 5-member teams, to very, very large organizations. So DevSpaces fits every role, and it fundamentally addresses the problems that I described earlier. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about slides or showing slides, and let's dive right in. Stephen, back to you.
Thanks, Raul. Really appreciate the big picture overview. It's really exciting to see, to be able to have access to these cloud-based ephemeral environments. And just to echo what you said, I remember in my last development role, there was almost an onboarding ceremony that was about a week long, that consisted of Zoom calls and screen shares with different product owners. And by the time getting the whole stack up and running, it was literally about a week. And this was in the context of just a few developers all in the same time zone. So it was really easy to say, hey, how does this work? Can we do a quick screen share? But that model doesn't scale. So let's, as you said, let's dive right in to DevSpaces and give it a try. So on this last slide that we showed that this is one way to start. But let's show you how to get into DevSpaces. So we have our Git repository here, and this is a Ruby app. It's pretty simple. And we'll notice, if you look at the app, and here I'll put the link into the chat so you can follow along, and please do follow along. Here we go. The link is in the chat. It's a public repository. You can see the only big difference, and we'll explain the details later, is this gitpod.yaml file, which shows how to set up the DevSpace. It's pretty simple. So we'll see the details in a moment. But so let's get into it. So we click this DevSpaces button. Now what's happening is, behind the scenes, resources are being allocated for our project, and then a fresh new instance is cloning the repository, and then it's reading this gitpod.yaml, which is saying, okay, how do I set this up? In this case, it's a Ruby project, so it is installing the dependencies, and it's actually even going to set up a test database for us and populate it with some sample data. And so all of this is happening in this fresh, clean environment. You don't have to do, again, in a previous role, you had to do, okay, Docker start a Postgres container, run a database initialization script, set your environment variables. You're not doing any of that here. This is all configuration as code, ready to go for you. And like Raul said, in a pristine development environment. Okay, so it's installed all the dependencies. And the really neat thing is that this is running in AWS. It's downloading the dependencies, which are also hosted in AWS. And so it's extremely fast, high bandwidth traffic. I used to live in a very low bandwidth area, and downloading a few gigabytes of dependencies basically meant a lunch break. All right, and here we go. We are up and running. And so just in those few seconds, it's taken our repository and literally built an entire one-off development environment for you, ready to go. So let's explore this environment a bit. We've got a preview of the page. We can explore our application. So this should look familiar to Ruby developers. We've got our ERB files that render the page. We have a fully functioning terminal. And so say we wanted to stop the server, restart the Rails server, it's fully functioning terminal. We've got Git integration, which we'll show you in a moment. So let's make a change. So let's look at our application one more time. And it says, are you a trivia expert? Well, expert, that might be too gentle. Let's go with genius. So let's make a new branch and say this is an initiative for marketing. So we'll do git status, and we see that we're in a nice, look at that, working tree clean, nothing to commit. We don't have a bunch of different stashes behind that you end up accumulating with a regular development environment. Let's make a new branch. Git branch. Let's say feature / update marketing terms. There we go. And now let's update expert, and we'll say genius. Now let's rerun our Rails server. So we see right away, we didn't even have to hit save. It automatically detected that there was a change. And it noticed now that there's a pending change. And then similarly, if we do git status, okay, we see that there's a modification. Now we see that there's Git integration built right into the platform. So we can stage this file to be committed and then put our commit message right here. Let's do that. We can say, as per marketing initiative, updating expert to genius. And let's do a commit. Okay. Now we can go further GitHub integration, and let's do a pull request. And we can create a pull request. So here is my change that I've made. I've made a change in this feature branch. I can test it. Let's do Rails server. It's going to detect that Rails server is going to want to, there we go, it's going to want to talk on port 3000. Okay, my change works. So let's make a pull request. Update. And then I'm creating my pull request and pushing that branch. Now, maybe Raul or Pavan, do you think you have time to review my pull request? I don't know if you have time to get your environment set up. Do you think you could do that for us?
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, why not?
Absolutely.
All right.
By the way, while Pavan just gets started on this, I don't know how many of you realized that everything that Stephen was doing was in a web browser. There was no local client. There was no local download. Everything was being done in a web browser. And you saw the way the response was on the UI. You couldn't differentiate a local instance from this remote development environment. So go ahead, Pavan, you can share your screen, and I'm going to do a parallel review over here. I'm just going to do exactly what you're doing there.
Okay. So this is the repo. So essentially, I went to the pull request, and I see like Stephen has given a pull request. So I can just click the pull request, then use the DevSpaces button to kind of take a look, saying like what are the changes Stephen has made. This is completely fresh. I have assumed that I have no clue what Stephen has done. I just got a pull request, and hence I'm kind of going through. So it's kind of bringing up the whole environment for me, like what Stephen had, so that I can actually do a pull request check, be it in terms of a code review, And I can also kind of run that and see, saying like, what is the impact of that change, right? So it's not just a question of just doing a code review because it's a fresh environment being spun up for me. I could actually kind of go and check and see like what are the change being made. So it's just kind of bringing this up.
Yeah, Stephen, can you just share my screen? So just to show
Absolutely.
everyone, I am doing a parallel review over here. This is my screen. I'm literally doing a parallel review while Pawan is doing the same thing. My environment is absolutely separate, absolutely clean, pristine, starting from scratch. So while all these other dependencies are coming up, why don't we go take a look at what this is the pull request. Let's give it a second over here. Let's take a look.
I think what's really neat, what you just said, we've just set up 3 independent Ruby environments. It doesn't matter what OS we're running. You could be running Linux. You might be on your iPad for all I know. Oh, okay. What are you doing there?
Oh, so I was just looking at the diff, which came up because this is a pull request. Because I started, I hit the DevSpaces button just like Pawan did. I actually see the delta over here because I want to make sure that the code change is appropriate. That's the only change you have. That looks fine to me. Now let's just make sure that this stuff all works. So I am going to just start the server again. And here, because I saw you do this, that when you start the server, the UI comes up automatically. So that's amazing. Okay, so are you a trivia genius? Yep, that looks right. Spelling looks okay. I think you're good to go. So let me go back to the pull request. And let me add a comment. This looks good.
Yeah, thanks.
And I will come in and submit. Since Pawan is head of engineering for DevSpaces, I will let him say it is approved. And so, yeah, I'm just commenting and submitting. And that's my review. It's that easy to look at someone else's pull request on an entire product, pull down all the dependencies, make sure everything is working before you sign off on it. And I literally did not have to download anything on my local machine. I just depended on all the configuration for the dev environment that was already provided as code. And the team couldn't be more productive than this to get things started. Pawan, how are things going at your end?
Yes, I could see the same thing. So I also could see like, are you a Jiva genius on my environment as well? Which essentially means parallelly 2 people could bring up and spin up that instance. And then you can do even parallel reviews, right? Which means any number of people could kind of parallelly bring in that environment, what a developer just did, and then do a parallel review. So I can say like, yeah, it looks fine to me. And then I can say like approve and submit LGTM. And I could kind of get out of the review mode. I can go back and see in terms of my regular files where I could take a look in terms of what the code looks like and everything. I could kind of explore, go out of the review mode.
That's really, really neat. I think we almost, those of us who've been using this for a while can almost take it for granted. But kind of remembering some of the previous development experiences I would have, this is the time where I'd expect a Slack message from Raul saying, is there some environment variable you need to set? And then we'd have to do a screen share, track this issue down. I remember in one particular project, we had one back end and there were 2 parallel efforts going on. One was to port it from MySQL to Postgres, and the other one was to change the data model. And then in this particular company, we had mandatory code reviews at certain checkpoints. And it was such a annoyance when one of those came through because you'd have to stop everything that you were doing, reset your environment variables, close some Docker containers, close everything in your editor. Here it's just another browser tab, right? It's totally isolated. They have nothing to do with each other. You can just get right back to work. It's really, really neat. We have a question coming in from Aloke. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And it says,
From Aloknath. Yeah.
There we go. Can you integrate your favorite editor in DevSpaces?
Yeah. So, Pawan, you want to address that one?
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, you could actually use your local VS Code and connect remotely to this. So you could set up something called as an IDE preference. So you set up an IDE preference, you could open up your local IDE and then connect remotely to this DevSpace, which means you can absolutely use your local IDE for this.
Exactly. We see another question here that has just come in from Jonathan, I
Here
think.
we go.
Great. So the question here is, does this work if databases like MySQL and MongoDB need to be spun up and run the app and test or approve the POR? I think this is a good segue. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. And I think I'm going to call on Pawan to showcase one of our nightmare enterprise products. So yeah. By the way, I think Jonathan has an extension to his question to say, does this also show up in the PR? It was not POR. But yes, the answer is absolutely yes. It doesn't matter whether it's the dev environment and the PR environment are exactly the same. So Pawan, do you want to pull up the famous or the notorious?
Yes, I'm going to bring up
Beast.
a repo. We have a product called SLI, which is an e-commerce-based product line, which has like multiple modules to kind of bring in. This specific one is kind of quite famous internally because we had like 16 repos it is kind of dependent on, and it's like quite a wide variety of things this product or project is dependent on. The example what gentleman asked for example, this has a MongoDB dependency. It has like so many other servers which had so many other code bases. Just on the port numbers alone, there's like what 45 servers running on this as a dependency. I just opened this repo ahead. If you see here, like all of these dependent servers are running in a single browser-based IDE, like 16 repos all opened up in a single place. I don't think so. My local MacBook can probably do this. Like it'll literally stutter otherwise, right? So if you notice here, you have like Mongo running, you have discovery services running, like so many things running as terminals, and then putting together such kind of such a large project in itself would have taken weeks otherwise for developers to kind of go set up all of the dependencies required and then get to that kind of a login screen would have been a nightmare otherwise. And because it is kind of completely terminal based and it will ask you saying like where you want the terminal to be created, right? So I could just kind of go and create another terminal, and then think of this as like any other local dev environment where you have a bash terminal and then all of these servers running. The sheer size of this file alone is staggering for me.
Yeah, and this is just literally the dependencies across all these different repositories that have different code bases, microservices based architecture, all these different services being launched, all the dependencies being run. So yeah, this setup was built, like I said, for us to build complex enterprise software, and we handle it all. And you, just like Pawan said, I think that kind of nails it. It is really hard to find a machine that won't die on you as you try to deploy and build all these really complex systems. So yes, it works for some incredibly complex systems, but it also works for the super easy stuff and everything in between. And that's the beauty of an environment like this. It's simple principles that basically drive the scale of this setup that allow you to just do your work and not worry about what you need to do behind the scenes.
Well, speaking of the super easy, just to highlight the Ruby quiz example, so we have the opposite end of the spectrum. This is just a really simple task, right? This is running SQLite, I believe, and you could do it this way. Just have one simple bundle task to populate the test database. And another way of doing it is you could have, say, a test database that's running somewhere else, like say RDS, and you can have the environment variables automatically set up to point to that test database. I've seen that configuration as well. And the nice thing is, no matter how you do it, the configuration is part of your code. So it's embodied within that pull request, within that commit. So you don't need to Slack message each other with environment variable settings and little bash scripts to get this all to work.
Great. I think there's a question from Saurabh. Should we take that one? Saurabh asks a question would all these instances connect to the same data store? I mean, you could have it either way. You could actually have an RDS instance or some database or some resource, that's remote, which if as a development practice, your entire team needs to access it for, some standard data, that's fine as well. Or you could literally have every dev space or a workspace have its own database or a database instance. So for example, what Pawan was just showing you, in that particular instance, the MongoDB was absolutely unique to Pawan's environment that he just set up. It's like a local machine. So that's a local MongoDB. But if he wanted to connect to a remote MongoDB, he could absolutely just change the connection settings over there and connect to whatever was remote. So all of those options are equally valid and equally used in our environments. Yeah, I hope that addresses the questions. Please, by the way, we love these questions, so please keep them coming. We'd love to keep answering them.
All right, we've got another question from Andrew. Let me put this one on the screen. Are there limitations on Rails version, EY stack version? I think, should we have Daniel? Would you like to take this one?
Sure, thanks. Actually, no, there is no limitations either in the Ruby on Rails side or any part of the engine yard stack. Matter of fact, you can use DevSpaces as well to develop your own chef recipes and then push from the DevSpace and deploy them on your engine yard cloud environment. So no limitations altogether for anything related to Rails, stacks, databases, or anything that will end up running on an engine yard environment.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of a preview under the hood, basically your dev environment is a Docker container. Now that Docker container, we have a default one that gets kicked up, which has support for about 25 languages out of the box. So even if your environment was not containerized, and you did not have a standard Docker container to do this, you would start from scratch where, let's say you had a machine with 25 languages and the basics installed on it. But you absolutely could customize it to whatever extent you wanted. SLI, for example, if you can bring up, Pawan, that Docker, can we just bring up the SLI config file?
Yeah.
So right at the top of it, there is a gitpod.docker file that it refers to as its base template or the base image. And if you go to the gitpod.docker file, it's a custom Docker file where there are very specific things that this particular product needs that you won't find anywhere else at all. So we just pointed to this Docker file, and DevSpaces knows to build that container and use that as the base image for your IDE. And anytime you change your Docker file, DevSpaces will be cognizant of the change, and it will then launch the updated Docker container and then inject all the other, IDE related stuff onto that container before making it available to you in the browser. So, and all of that still happens in seconds, which is so unbelievable. So as your teams start changing the dependencies, the environment variables, you are still guaranteed a clean development environment every single time in a matter of seconds, no matter how complex it gets.
And this is so much easier than, okay, someone has to become the Docker Compose guru of the group and deal with support for all, that's non-trivial. I mean, it's not a trivial thing to set up. And so by having this all happening in the background, including, like I said, the test databases, and then having it instantiated and run for you and in your browser in a few seconds, it's a really powerful concept.
Yeah. By the way, one of the things that we will showcase shortly, and I'm going to have Daniel, come in just a bit to kind of showcase, is how engineered customers can leverage DevSpaces to start all of their development work and directly push all of their deployments over to both EYC and EYK. Do we want to take one more question? I think this is related to something that we just covered, but just to make sure it is addressed. There's a question from Felix.
Yes, yeah. I think the question is on RubyMine IDE. RubyMine is like a JetBrains IDE. So if you're a JetBrains flavor of IDE, you could still use that. You could use remote connect of JetBrains and then connect to DevSpaces. It is possible to use.
Great. Andrew has another very interesting question, which I'd love to bring up here. Stephen, you're going to be busy with these, and
This is fantastic.
Yeah, this is fantastic. We love all of these questions that are coming in. So the question is, you've mentioned a few times, you refer to this as environment as code. Do you have a sense for how much effort is usually required to write your first code environment? And it varies by product. Yeah, absolutely. So the beauty of all of this is that to get started, you don't need to have code written up at all, and you can discover it along the way. So I would request anybody, in fact, Pawan, can we just pick up any random, or Stephen, let's pick up, just start off the browser. Let's pick up any random GitHub repository. Anyone wants to make a suggestion as to which one we pull up? Any recommendations here? Pawan, Daniel, any random GitHub repository. Let's take any public repository.
Good.
So we take up Linux or any of the Apache projects.
Yeah, you can pick one on this.
Yeah, let's pick any of the Apache. Just search for Apache in there. Let me see. I'm searching for a public repo in here.
Yeah.
One called Flink.
Yeah, Flink is actually pretty neat.
Yeah.
Flink is great. Okay, let's just open it up in DevSpaces. Now, Flink, by the way, is not a DevSpace customer. So let's just see how we get started with it.
And so see that there is no gitpod.yaml file in here.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens.
Let's give it a second. So here what it's trying to do is it sees that there isn't a gitpod.yaml. So it's going to default to our default container, which has support for about 25 different languages.
That's
So
it's called the workspaces-full container.
Yeah. So it'll first start that one up. And there it is. So you have your entire code base over there, ready to get started. Let's start a terminal. Just go to terminal on the top. The burger on the top left.
Here we go. Usually.
And then new terminal. So we have a terminal. We have all the code. Now I have to figure out how to build this product. Now, can we go through some documentation to see what I need to do to build it? Again, this is literally the problem with most code bases. To learn how to get started with a product where you have to set up the entire environment is a pain. So having DevSpaces set up makes life so much easier. So let's see. Building Apache Flink from source. Okay, what do you need to do? We can ignore the git clone step.
Oop.
What is the next step?
It was.
In the README.
Just had it right here.
Okay, cd Flink. Can you just copy and paste it there? Oh, and this process will take up to 10 minutes. Awesome.
Interesting. Well, that's pretty neat that we've done that. We've downloaded nothing to our local machine. We haven't, and this was a fairly good size random project.
Actually, it's a very, very interesting project. I wouldn't say it's a random project.
Well, random in the sense that how we picked it, not.
But yeah, and there you go. It's actually building. It's compiling, and let's do this. Why don't we set this up as a? Let's do this team a favor. Why don't we start up a gitpod.yaml file?
Yeah. Okay.
And add this to the tasks.
Let's do.
And let's submit a pull request to them so that the next person who is trying to figure out how to get started with it. Let's do a branch.
Let's see. Okay.
Yeah, you can do something called GP init, and then it'll pre-fill that with the default values for you.
So here's the default file. If you do GP init, you get all of this. And yeah, just let's update the task to say compile, or let's say compiling. Yeah, echo compiling. And then what is that command that we ran, which you just discovered?
It was.
I think it's in your terminal.
Here we go.
Or the other terminal.
Oh, it's very. It's been a lot of output since then. Okay.
Paste. There you go.
Oh, I see. Something going on with my clipboard here. Copy. There we go.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and ports, actually, let's delete the ports because I don't know what ports Flink needs or opens. So we can comment that out or leave that, just delete it for the time being. No, that will be invalid. Just take out ports.
Yeah,
okay, and yeah, we can just check this in. So it's really that simple. It doesn't inhibit the fact that you don't have a configuration for getting started. Doesn't inhibit you. It actually enables you to go start cleaning things up the next time you start an environment. And once you do it, you never have to repeat it again. So, Andrew, I hope that addresses your question. And I hope this was a complex enough scenario to show you a real world example. Okay, with that, why don't we jump right in to Daniel's demo, where Daniel, we'd love for you to walk us through what it takes to get EYC and EYK applications developed on DevSpaces and then pushed onto EYC and EYK.
Sure. I will share my screen now.
And by the way, please keep the questions coming.
So I think
you guys have been fantastic so far.
You're seeing my screen at the moment. I'm using the same project that Steven was using. So here I have my own DevSpace up and running. I did a couple of things up front. So first of all our workspaces come with the EYK CLI tool already installed here. So this is coming out of the box, and then this allows to talk to the EYK clusters, to deployments, etc., with them. I have already created an EYK application in one of our internal clusters. So EYK info here already works.
Daniel, could you just also zoom in a little bit on your screen so that it becomes easier for everyone else to
sure.
read it?
Is that any better?
Maybe one more would help.
Okay,
perfect.
Great. That sounds okay. Let me just tweak this pane off. All right. We're not going to be looking specifically at the code at the moment. So here is our code. We have the EYK CLI installed, as I was saying. And we also have an application created on the EYK cluster. So that can be checked with Git remote. And this is pointing to one of our internal clusters at Engine Yard. So right now, right here, I can just do git push EYK and get the application being deployed towards EYK. Now I can open another terminal and look at the EY Cloud side of things. So what I have done already and what we should do on the git-pod.yaml for this project is have the EY core gem installed. So here it is, EY core specifically. And I have it pointing to one of our internal environments as well for Ruby Quiz. So if I do, I can do basically EY core deploy, and then point to the account specifically. And then the environment, the environment name again. And that will be it. I can just fire the deployment and get done with it. In the meantime, here on the EYK side, I can also do git push EYK and basically fire a deployment. Let me see if I did the homework, pushing my own SSH key here. No, I have not done that. But anyways, here from the same DevSpaces environment, on the same space where I'm editing my code and merging pull requests and everything, I have access to both the engineer platforms just by executing the same commands that any engineer customer is already used to. So full integration and ready to go there as well.
So the EYK command is built right into the default DevSpaces workspace image. They don't have to do anything else. It's ready to go. It's right there.
Right. And we should actually do the same for the EY core CLI tool, so that they both come prepackaged with the tool itself, right?
Actually, perfect. So that brings up an interesting question. So is DevSpaces an EY product? Is it specific to EYC or EYK?
Yeah, so great question. So DevSpaces is an engineered product, but it is not specific to EYC or EYK. It is specific to developers who want to develop any code anywhere and don't want to be hindered by their local machines. So I would say DevSpaces allows you to pretty much program in any language. It allows you to work with any technology, and it simplifies the way you operate. Now, we do use the engineered containers platform to allow you to deploy engineered in two modes. The first one, of course, is the public mode, where you can get signed up with eyk.devspaces.com and get started kind of right away. You can sign up, start using it, no constraints. Just to realize that is what we call a shared cluster. So in a shared cluster, we have a common cluster where you will have your isolated container. You can use it as much as you want. You operate with it, and that's kind of the operating model. There are, however, customers of ours who require more, greater security, more privacy. They don't want their code to be on a shared cluster. In which case, within engineered containers itself, you can provision a private cluster in which DevSpaces gets loaded. Pawan, do you want to just quickly showcase how that is done?
Yeah, yes, Tom. So when you log into Engineered, you would have a new menu structure here.
Just 1 second, Pawan. I think we don't have your screen. There it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you log into UIK, you would notice that there is a new menu structure which is added called DevSpaces. So if you click that, you would get an option to kind of add your own private cluster. So you could click and add DevSpace, choose the account in which it is part of, give it a name. Let's say my private cluster. You could choose what kind of architecture this cluster should have. I think the team will kind of expand more on this, be it x86 and ARM. Sometimes if you have developments specifically on ARM, we would recommend you to choose the ARM cluster because you would want to keep the dev and the prod closer on the same architecture. You could also choose which region this specific cluster should be part of, which means you could choose any one of those plethora of things. And then we have, because this being a private cluster, you could restrict the logins to this to a very specific GitHub organization, which means if all of your developers are part of your company's private GitHub org, you could specify that and then kind of restrict the logins to only that GitHub org.
Yeah. And again, I think Pawan brought up a very interesting point. We have support both for x86 architecture as well as ARM. And the reality is that the world is moving towards ARM architecture. So if you start looking at the Graviton processors and the price performance improvement that Graviton now provides, there is no doubt that everyone should really be on ARM-based, instances. So, unfortunately, none of us have a local development machine that can run ARM, or more precisely, that can run Graviton, specifically Graviton 2 or Graviton 3. So how do you ensure that your code is going to run seamlessly with all the dependencies? If you're using some Java code somewhere which requires a particular version of Corretto, you want to make sure that that works beautifully and performs well on ARM. How do you ensure that that happens? We've done a lot of work along with AWS to make sure that DevSpaces, the Graviton stuff, all of them work seamlessly, and our customers can literally just benefit from that out of the box. And here you can see on this slide that Stephen just put up the contrast between what you need to do to get started with Graviton if you were to do it on your own, versus just go to trygraviton.devspaces.com, go there, start with the GitHub repository, and just start using it. So yeah, it's really, really simple. We've spent a huge amount of time making sure that this is something that we and our customers could leverage and use and make ourselves incredibly productive. And we absolutely love it. So that's why we're so excited to share this all with you. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I addressed the thing of the ARM processors as well as the private clusters. I think there is another question in here that I'd just like to quickly bring up. Great. Pavan, you want to take this one?
Yeah, you could share. So there is an option called sharing an URL. So because individually, when you kind of open a workspace, you would get a unique URL for that. And then you have an option to kind of share. And only if you share, that link is share enabled. And then you could kind of give that link to your colleague to kind of open up and see like a pair coding kind of a thing. Where you can say, like,
Do you want to just demonstrate that quickly, Pavan? Do we have a workspace that's up?
Yeah, let me just check quickly. This is the one which is the front end thing which I'm using. So you could always have an option called, let's say, share a running workspace, and then do you select, do you want to really share? Yeah, like just go ahead and share. And once you have it, they copy that link to the URL, and then you could give it to your colleagues so that they can kind of go and open that as well. It's very, very easy. So unless you specifically say share, it doesn't, because sometimes developers are like very private. I don't want to share my stuff. But if you really want to help to debug, you could do that.
So this isn't just this is better than a screen share, but they can actually sit there and make changes to your code that you're writing. Hey, let's work through this couple of lines together. Is that right?
You could partly, yeah, because it's exactly opening the same URL at both the places, which means if you're typing something, the other guy would know like you're typing something right now.
Wow, so it's almost like a Google Docs view of your code where you can simultaneously edit at the same time, and you still get the benefits of the isolation, the containerization, the nothing's touching anybody's local machine.
Nothing.
That's
awesome. I see a question from Alok. And I think there's also a question here from Andrew. So we'll try and address that at the same time. I think the questions are pretty much the same. Number one, what is the pricing, and is there a cost for DevSpaces? So what we've done is we have actually added no cost whatsoever for any of our customers to use DevSpaces. You just pay for whatever you use from a cluster standpoint. That is a standard EYK pricing. For more details, you can go to devspaces.com, and you will see the pricing tab right there. The pricing is exactly the same. We do all the work on making DevSpaces available to you as part of the EYK platform. There is no additional charge for using it. You just pay for whatever container usage you consume as part of your environment. That's it. And over a period of time, We would love to get more feedback of other tools that you would love to see in the EYK platform, because we want to make sure that the developer community really loves all of these tools, and we will do all the work to make it available on the platform, so you don't have to spend the time and effort, working through all these really complex scenarios. Okay, back to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you. And then I wanted to mention that the shared DevSpaces is basically available starting now. So we're really excited for that to be offered. And let's see, we have about 5 minutes left. Just as a quick demo of the ARM, I think that's a really neat thing to see. I've got this little very simple repository, and so from the try graviton, I posted the link in the chat, and we can prefix our URL here, eygraviton.devspaces.com. Here is a really simple repository I made that will just show you what platform you're running on. We can do this, and again, it's allocating some resources on an ARM-based cluster, doing cloning, getting set up, getting the whole environment set up, and in a few seconds, we're going to see code running on a Graviton 3. And again, remembering the alternative of how that is to be done. And this is the notes that I wrote from when I played with it. This isn't exaggerated. This is what I had to do. You set it up by hand, do all this work. So it's pretty exciting that you can run on a Graviton literally by just changing a URL. It doesn't get much easier than that. Thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. What we wanted to do is have a few breakout sessions. If there's additional targeted questions, I'll put this up on the screen. Let's see. One moment here. Let me put this up on the screen. And actually, this is what we'll do is Pavan can talk through some advanced use cases about multi-repository, and then Daniel can talk a bit more about deployment. I'll put the Zoom URLs into the chat, and then Raul and I can stay on to take any more additional general questions. But I just wanted to respect your time that we're coming up on at the end of the hour. Thank you again for all of the questions. Putting in the Zoom URLs now. And then again, feel free to stay longer, chat with Raul and I on this channel, or go to either Pavan or Daniel's Zooms for more targeted questions on either multi-repo setup or deployment in particular. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining, and let's see, we'll stay on for maybe 5 or 10 minutes to see if there's any additional questions. Let's see. All right. Well, it looks like, let's see. Well, I think Pavan and Daniel, your Zooms will be open for a little while. Awesome, thank you. Well, I think we should sign off, but thanks again. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. We've got on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or just send an email. We'll post some notes to the event afterwards. And just thank you again for joining, and I think we're going to sign off. All right, have a lovely afternoon, evening, early morning, wherever you are, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank everyone for joining. Have a good weekend.